place for it. So the timing is critical here. There's no wiggle room on this. So those folks who struggle with schedules are probably going to struggle with this. You've got to be pretty rigid. So on day 16, the queen emerges. I don't like this word, cells hatch. Eggs hatch, cells emerge. Day 16, the queens will emerge from the cell. It takes a while between day 16 and to see eggs again. So 7 to 10 days after she emerges, you're going to see eggs. So if you just kind of ballpark view here, 27 days, so you're talking a month roughly. So there's no magic here. It's basically a month it takes to get a queen out. And once she starts laying eggs, and if you're going to sell queens, don't sell her the first time you see that egg. You've got to let that queen develop. Generally speaking, you want to have a queen laying for 2 weeks before you sell her. You want to sell a quality product, and you can't judge a quality product by looking at the first egg she makes. Okay?
How much did you expect in the first 2 weeks?
Sorry?
How many eggs did you expect?
I want to see the thing laid up. It's going to be consistent with populations, right? So if you have a little mini nuke like that, there's not going to be as much space for her to lay. But if you have her in a 5-frame nuke, for example, I'd expect to see, the first day she's laying, I'd expect to see half a frame of eggs. After that, I like to see the whole thing laid up, and I'm going to be looking at the brood pattern. So I'm going to be evaluating how that queen is laid. If she's kind of schizophrenic, she's laying a patch of eggs here and goes out to the outer frame and lays some patch of eggs over there, I've got a red flag on that queen, and I would evaluate her even longer. So that's what you want to make, big monster queen. Size matters in the queen world. This is her being introduced to her, hopefully, lifelong home. And don't get discouraged. Things are going to go badly. This is one indication of things going badly, okay? Just shake it off, start again. Okay, so that ends the first talk. Yes, sir.
What am I looking at there?
Oh, that is a laying worker condition. So either what happened is the queen was lost in a mating situation. She went out. She was either killed. In Hampton Roads, of course, we have lots of predators that like a snack. my mating success drops dramatically in the summer. That's another reason to get your queens mated early. Dragonflies are a big predator.
And if you have a purple martin house, get rid of it.
Good point. So this is a laying worker. What you see is, maybe it's hard to see back there, but there's lots of eggs in each cell. That's indicative of a laying worker. So a worker bee or worker bees have been promoted into laying drones, basically. So that's a very bad thing you've seen. So let's not dwell on the negative side of things, but that's something you're going to have to be on the lookout for.
On the upside, though, doesn't that up your drone population?
Yeah, but they're not good drones.
They're not bad drones, but I wouldn't bring those through. I mean, that's out of there, man.
Yeah.
So, okay, we got done with this one. Now we're going to talk about some biology. Let's see. On time here, surprisingly. So this is going to be kind of brief because there's an assumption I talked about earlier. I'm assuming everyone's kind of got the basics of some queen bee biology. So these are just some cool pictures I found online. That's the guy, that's the girl, and that's the one that makes the cells. So I have a couple of quotes here. Both of them I really appreciate. This one, the first one is by Sue Covey. Again, she is the creator of the New World Carnelian. She was at Ohio State for a while. Now she's out in Washington. a very, very good queen breeder. She worked with a lot of the California queen breeders out there. She does their insemination work. She basically runs their breeding program. So very, very knowledgeable person. Queen bee larva receives 1,600 feeding visits from nurse bees compared to 143 visits received by a worker larva. So that is over an order of magnitude more feedings than a regular worker larva. So you've got to have a lot of nurse bees to manage that intensive feeding. Okay. And again, this is my favorite beekeeper of all, Michael Palmer. I think he's just a genius, beekeeping genius. Attributes of a very good quality cell. They're large, well built, still provisioned with royal jelly when they go into nukes. Okay, and that's 2 days before they emerge. Remember, day 14, they go in the nukes. They're still provisioned with jelly. That means you had a lot of nurse bees and they jammed that cell full of royal jelly, so that queen has not only enough royal jelly to build up inside the cell, but there's some spare left behind. And as soon as she emerges, she's going to go back in and consume that. So all that's fundamental to her development. There's 3 players, we all know that, but in the production of queen cells, each one, production of queen bees, pardon me, each one has an essential role, of course. She's the one that's most notable. She's producing the egg. This guy over here, he is in 50% of the puzzle here. And without the worker bee, there would be no queen cells. So you need all 3 of those. A little more detail about the different castes and how they develop. Queen bee, basically the eggs hatch at roughly 3 days, between day 3 and day 4. The cells are capped roughly on day 8, and they will emerge on day 16. You can see on most of these there's a plus or minus because the local conditions dictate that. Not every queen type has the exact same emergence time. So there's a plus or minus a little bit. The worker, of course, all the eggs hatch at exactly the same time. The capping varies between the 3 castes in the emergence, and the final state varies as well. But we're focusing primarily on the queen. So day 16 she emerges, and day 28, you expect to see some eggs, but it can be, depending particularly on weather, it can be longer. So day 4, that's our target for getting the larva out of the cell into what we hope to rear the queen in. Your kits have cell cups. We're going to be taking this larva out of the frame in her cell and put her in that cell cup. At day 8, she's capped over, and on day 14, that's when she has to be moved out of the cell builder. Okay? You don't want to leave the cells in much past day 14. Day 15, you're on the ragged edge, because remember, this is a plus or minus here, this emergence. If you have one that emerges early, which one's going to emerge early?
The one that was laid earliest.
The one that was laid, older, the one you grafted from an older, slightly older larva. And what's that one going to be? That's going to be the smallest of them. So the smallest one just got out and killed all your beautiful cells. So that's a total fail when that happens. So how does these quality cells get made? Well, it is right here. The nurse bees handle all cell development. And it's the hypopharyngeal gland that is responsible for the development of queen bees. So in nurse bees, this gland is large. It has a high secretory activity, and it contributes to the production of royal jelly. It's a gland right in their head, essentially. These vessels are already apparent at 3 days old, so the nurse bee, when she's 3 days old, these hypopharyngeal glands are already, special vessels are already present. Peak production is around 6 days old. So when a nurse bee emerges, 6 days later, that's her peak production stage. So keep that in mind. What do we want? We want to produce big cells, and we produce big cells by having lots of royal jelly. To get lots of royal jelly, we have to have lots of nurse bees, and if they're 6 days old when we're building cells, all the better. So all kind of comes together here. But this hypopharyngeal gland, that is the essence of making queen cells. I'm going to skip that one. As worker bees start foraging, their hypopharyngeal glands decrease in size. So foragers are not going to be good at making queen cells. They secrete at a lower rate and produce a slightly different protein blend, including enzymes involved in carbohydrate metabolism. What does that mean? That means they're inverting the nectar. Their focus is no longer making queen cells or feeding larvae. Their focus now is making honey. So they're basically producing enzymes to do the conversion of nectar into honey. So we've all seen these, right? Queen cups. They're formed due to the development of new queens. That's kind of a natural one. Some colonies will create and keep lots of them present. Different types of bees have different modes of operation. You'll go into a colony, and some happen to keep maybe 10, 15 of these things around. So the first time you open that colony, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And you'll see that they're just cups. There's nothing inside them, right? I don't necessarily like that. It always increases my blood pressure a little bit. But that's what they have to make when they're producing queens naturally. All honeybees are fed some royal jelly for the first few days after hatching, but only the queen larvae are fed on it exclusively. So hopefully that's all review for you guys. But this is a noteworthy thing. Nurse bees have only roughly 4 days to feed a queen larva. So all the magic has to happen in 4 days. And, you know, that's what differentiates it from a worker bee. These 4 days. So this is where proper cell building techniques make a huge difference. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Cell building techniques. That's where the queens get made. Okay? Now this slide is something new I grabbed this year. This is from some work from Professor David Tarpey. Anybody know Tarpey? Yeah, so he's a pretty famous guy. He's at NC State, doing a lot of work, really great work actually. But there's a really nice YouTube video of him talking about basically queens. And this slide he presented that really caught my attention. And it really highlights what it takes to make a good quality queen. So on this axis here, this vertical axis, is, if you can't read it, says reproductive potential. You want high reproductive potential. On this side, it's the same scale, but this is a queen bee. This is what's called an intercast. Has anyone heard intercast before? Okay, so an intercast is almost what the name suggests. You have a queen bee at the top, and you have a worker bee at the bottom. Somewhere in between, if she's not developed properly, she'll be what's called an intercast. This bee is sterile, right? Workers are sterile. The queen bee is not. The intercast is not sterile, but she's very poor quality. Her pheromone complement is poor. Her spermatheca size is small. Her ovaries are small and will generally make a very poor queen. So I'd like to put a big red X on this. We're not making intercasts. Nothing in between. We're staying on this top line here. So what he did to come up with this chart, yes?
I don't know if you'll hit this later, but if you see that the queen that you tried to raise is an intercast, do you like kill that one? Do you eliminate it and try to replace it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We hope to cull that before she ever emerges. And I'm going to definitely talk about that later, okay? So, how he came up with this chart, essentially, was they intentionally grafted larvae at different times. Not that 3.5-day larva. They would graft 3.5, but then they would graft a day later, and a day later, and a day later. And they would make queens from those, and then they would measure the queens. Various markers that they would measure. Thorax size, where the wings connect. That diameter is very telling if that queen is good. So if you ever had a queen pop through a queen excluder, you're like, wow, there's something wrong with my queen excluder. Probably not. What's wrong is the size of the queen you made was too small. Her thorax. What prevents a queen from going through a queen excluder is her thorax, not her abdomen. It's her thorax. So if that thorax is small, she can pop through that queen excluder, and next thing you know, you have all brood above your brood chamber. So they grafted different size things, measured the various indicators, the number of ovaries, the size of the ovaries, the number of ovules, the tubes inside the ovary, and they came up with this plot like this. So I thought this was really important. So to get the highest quality queen, you're basically right here. So nothing more than 24 hours old. So that's kind of the end of the grafting day. Anything older than 24-hour larva, you're wasting your time, wasting resources. So these are some of the empirical predictors that David was using on the previous slide. Body size, so again the thorax, ovaries, spermatheca, that's where she stores the semen from the insemination from the drone. Of course, there's an empirical prediction of great queens. She's obviously free of health issues. Okay, so nosema, that's something that all beekeepers have to deal with. Tracheomite, not so much anymore, but this has become more of a deal. Viruses have become a bigger deal with Varroa. Varroa, not only do they predate on the developing larva, but they also move viruses throughout the country through Varroa mites. That's a big deal. The size of the ovaries and these ovioles, I don't pronounce that very well. But you want 300 or so. Those are essentially, the ovary is a big bundle of these little tubes. And each one of those tubes is called ovariole. How do you pronounce it?
Ovariole.
Ovariole, thank you. You need about 300 of those in a quality queen. These intercasts will have about 200. Also, insemination quality. The amount of stored sperm matters. And that, of course, matters in terms of the size of the spermatheca, the vessel that you can store the semen in, as well as the mating conditions that she was mated in. As well as another thing is the sperm viability. How has that queen developed? What conditions was she treated in? Did she ever get too hot? Did she get too cold? The sperm can die inside the spermatheca, essentially reduce her mating ability, or insemination ability. And of course, mating quality is good too. So I thought this was an interesting thing, something to keep in mind. the previous slide has the link to Tarpey's YouTube video. It's lengthy, but I think it's a worthwhile watch. So, as part of Tarpey's work, he mentioned this as well. So what is the value of, we said we're going to try to make quality queens, but why? Does it matter? Turns out it does matter, because they're able to take data on quality queens versus these not so quality queens. And it turns out that quality queens directly translate into colony success. Success measured as follows: more worker and drone comb built, more seal brood, more food stored, and ultimately larger colony sizes. Those are all good measures. What beekeeper doesn't want this, right? I probably should have this slide earlier because this shows the ovaries, shows the Christine
Ovarials.
and the spermatheca. That's, you want this part of the queen to be as big as possible. You want the thorax to be big, you want the head big. Those are all indicators of good performance. So yeah, no intercasts produced from these folks in this class, right? No runs allowed. Queen cell and provisions of that queen cell are directly related to the size of the resulting queen. So tiny little queen cells, answering the question back there. Runty little queen cells, they don't make it out of the cell builder. We're not going to be planting little tiny runty queen cells in our very expensive, relatively speaking, mating nuke, okay? It's a huge drain on resources. You find them, call them out, don't waste your resources bringing those cells into mating. Virgin queens, real briefly here, significantly reduced pheromone complement. Of course, queen is a big walking pheromone production system. When they first emerge, they don't have much pheromones developed yet. Newly hatched queens have the least amount of pheromones. When they emerge, they're being assisted by workers. So if you've ever seen a queen emerging, worker bees are on top of that cell, feeding her as soon as she's coming out. Not so much for worker bees. Worker bees just emerge on their own. They'll manage queens much differently. After emergence, in a natural condition, they'll go on a seek and destroy mission. This is what we want to avoid by pulling our cells on day 14. So out of the cell builder, we're pulling queen cells out on day 14, and we have a home from them, so we're planning ahead. If we don't, we're going to lose all our cells to the first out. I don't know if you've ever heard queens piping, but it's a really interesting thing. It's a very high-pitched sound, different frequencies, different repeating of those frequencies. Queen producers should always be on guard with potential rogue queens in their cell builders. So when we make the cell builder, we have to be careful that we don't put a queen in there. They're not going to be making queens if they have a queen. We also need to be careful about allowing queens to get into our cell builder naturally. You have a big clump of bees in this box with no queen. Any virgin queen on a mating flight can smell that colony. It's like, that's a nice one right there. She can pop right in there, and guess what? You've just lost all your cells that are building. So this is the spermatheca. When the queen is not mated, so when she first emerges from her cell, it's going to be crystal clear like this, a little tiny crystal ball. After she goes out and mates, the semen essentially migrates into this vessel. Now, if you ever want to dissect a queen, you have to you're looking for that, right? You don't want to find that, but there's this thing called a tracheal net that encapsulates the spermatheca. So you have to remove that tracheal net, because if you just find the spermatheca, Of course, this queen's never gonna live after this procedure. You have to pull the tracheal net off this because it's gonna look as though she's made it, but you're not looking at the right thing. So there's a little tiny netting that goes around the spermatheca, and you just kind of rub your fingers on it, it'll peel off. And then you'll see either this, or you'll see that. You hope to see this. This is typically done when you're learning instrumental insemination. You want to see if you have mastered the skill properly. Or, I've done it, and I'll show you a couple slides here. I had a queen that was very suspect, and I'm like, okay, she's not laying, what's wrong? So, this is her. I have a great picture of her on my wrist, but you can see here she's got a big abdomen. Now, that's a nice sized queen. She was in a mating nuke. A week goes by, 2 weeks go by, nothing. 3 weeks go by. I'm like, all right, lady, it's time to get busy here. Still, 3 weeks, not laying. Between week 3 and week 4, I'm like, all right, I'm sorry, it's just not panning out for her. So I dissected her, and so who thinks this queen was mated? Anybody? You think? Yeah, I would think. That's what I thought over 3 weeks. I thought she was mated. Certainly looking at the abdomen and how the bees were responding to her, all looked well. Turns out she wasn't. I don't know if there was something wrong internally with her, but that's her spermatheca on my finger, crystal clear. So she wasn't mated. So, you know, you give them 10 days, 14, start looking for eggs. After that, the clock is ticking, you know. 3 weeks, it's kind of my go, no-go time. If she hasn't laid an egg in 3 weeks, pretty much pull her out at that point. So drone bees, of course, they're male. They're sexually mature 2 weeks after emergence. They mate in flight with virgin queens. That's pretty much their sole purpose in life. After they mate, they die essentially. The whole internal reproductive structure essentially gets ripped out of the drone. And they're kicked to the curb in the fall. And genetic terminology of the haploid. So they only have half the genetic complement as a worker or a queen bee. So they only have 16 chromosomes. This is what the reproductive structure of the drone bee looks like. I mentioned previously I do instrumental insemination, so you have to do this manually. So this is called partially inversion, essentially. You have to basically squeeze the drone. This is step 1. And you have to go from step 1 to step 2, fully inverted. So here is the semen. Essentially, in a microscope, remove that semen from that endophallus. And that's what you collect, and you inseminate queens with that. But 50% of the genetic material comes from the drone. Honeybee genetics workers and workers and queens, they are diploid, so they have 32 chromosomes. Eggs carry 16. You get the other 16 from the male. Each egg produced by the queen is a unique combination of her genetics. So not every egg produced by the queen is identical. So some folks were not clear about this, that each egg is a unique combination of basically half the queen's chromosomes. Since the queen mates with multiple drones, each having the same mother but different fathers, within the colony is a subfamily, the same mother and same father. Just a fun fact. I'm not going to utilize it in this class. Yes, sir?
So folks who are selling Russian bees or whatever the brand name is, the only way they could do that then is by this artificial insemination?
to make a true breeder queen, you have to control both sides of the equation. You have to control the queen and you have to control the drone. They both have to come from known sources.
Okay,
So yeah,
so you need to ask that question. I
you need to ask, you need to know what you're buying, you know. If it's, you know, if you're going for something, you know, special, a
Right.
Russian queen, then to market that and sell that as a producer, you'd have to be pretty rigorous about how you manage your breeding sources.
Okay.
Not only the queen, but obviously all the drones around. You have to be very rigorous on how you do that. So a lot of the stuff is open-mated, so, you know, they can't give you a certificate, right? You only really get a certificate when you buy instrumentally inseminated queen.
Thank you.
Hey, Sean, I spent a lot of time, this is probably a good time to ask a question. What's the range for the drones that you typically see? I've read all kinds of numbers from a low end of 12 up to, extreme cases of 100, but normally I'll find anything from 12 to 50.
Yeah, basically 18. That's kind of where I'm pulling the semen from, 18 drones per queen. That's kind of my measure of goodness.
Okay.
That's like 12 to 15 microliters of semen.
So Sean, real quick, going back to the previous question, so if we're doing backyard beekeeping and we're raising queens just to have a local queen source.
Yep.
We just say it's a mated queen.
It's a mated queen, yep.
Okay.
That's all we can say. And that's good, that's okay. We're not selling bees with special pedigrees here. We're selling quality queens made from our own apiaries. Now, of course, we talked earlier that you have to start with good stock. So that's kind of the essential ingredients. And the good stock doesn't have to have a special pedigree on it. It has to come from a colony that has certain qualities, and those are subjective. Not everyone's going to have the same measures of goodness. My measure of goodness, I mentioned, I like to make honey. That's what we do. We make honey, and I don't like to treat my bees that much. So those are kind of my qualities. Those are the top two qualities of goodness. You can tell people if you're selling queens, what was the origin of the colony? What certain characteristics were you selecting for? A lot of folks in a backyard scenario want to have very gentle bees. They have neighbors nearby. They can't have aggressive bees or hyper-defensive bees right next to their neighbor. So they want to have very docile bees. That's great. That's not super high on my list because I have lots of property at the house and I have lots of out yards. Nobody's around those out yards, so it doesn't really matter if my bees are a little twitchy. I'm going for bees that are making honey and bees that are surviving winters without a lot of hand-holding. I'm not insulating my colonies. I'm not knitting little sweaters for these bees. I'm letting them fend for themselves, man. I'm not a big fan on insulating colonies in Virginia. Just not into that. I think it's kind of you gotta insulate your colonies, keep your bees alive. There's a problem. I've never done that. So let me see where we're at here.
You put a windbreaker on the hives?
I don't put any windbreaks.